think it was during one of the COVID High Holy Days that I spoke of my former love for the Choose Your Own Adventure books. That I loved that they had those clear choices, and from those choices, these very clear outcomes. I guess also I probably, looking back, loved the idea that you could choose your way to your desired outcome, especially, by the way, if you read backwards, like if you started from the end and worked your way forward. They offered this familiar trope, right? When faced with these binary options, this or that, there is a clear direction, and that the decision-making is fully in our power. But this Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, I'm actually thinking about the murky spaces, the times and places where the choice is not clear or it's not entirely ours to make. Religious literature, by the way, loves these moments. We and scholars of religion refer to liminal moments, moments that are betwixt and between. A liminal moment, the dictionary says, is an intermediate state, phase, or condition. It is in between, it is transitional. And really, Shabbat is actually our grand collective liminal moment each and every week. We are held in these hours between the week that was and the week that is yet to be. Now, you know I'm a lover of Hebrew, and Hebrew, of course, has a poetic-sounding phrase for this space. We say vein uvein, or bein uvein, between and between. For 665 days, just as we will later tonight, Jews around the world have been reciting the Achenu prayer. And these words, dating from medieval Europe, place our loved ones, our brothers and sisters of the community of Israel, in a liminal state. While we sing slightly different words here at Wise, the poetry of the traditional prayer offers this one particular image, describing the captives as ha'omdim bein bayam uvein vayavasha, standing between the sea and dry land. It's a heartbreaking image, really, to be stuck between, to be neither nor, to be bein uvein. And every time I say those words, I admit, I think certainly of the hostages of those faces, but I also think of dear friends in Israel who have also, for over 665 days, been living bein uvein, living between the shelter and their homes, between their daily lives and the daily reminders of this war and its costs, between October 7th and October 8th. They're not finished with one day, they tell me, but they're not quite at the next. And I think of families in Gaza as well, these mothers cradling their babies between bombs and hunger, bein uvein, between two impossible choices. Turns out, the choice is not always ours. So Tisha, as Rabbi Yoshi mentioned, Tisha B'Av begins tomorrow night. And perhaps it too is a liminal moment because it is an ending and it is a beginning. And for those hours in our sackcloth and ashes traditionally, we sit bein uvein, between and between. So first, the ending. 3 weeks ago, our tradition marked the start of this particular cycle. On the 17th of Tammuz, we are taught the walls of Jerusalem were breached. The 3 weeks following, which culminate as Tisha B'Av begins, are called Bein HaMitzarim. The phrase itself comes directly from the book of Lamentations, the text we read on Tisha B'Av. Lo matza manoach kol rodfeha hasiguha bein hamitzarim. She found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her, bein hamitzarim. Between the straits, it means between the narrow places. There's actually no bein uvein here. There's no choice, and in some ways, no liminal moment. There is nowhere to go and nowhere to turn. In bein hamitzarim, in those narrow places, we are stuck. For the Jewish calendar and for Jewish history, it perhaps describes the residents of Jerusalem stuck, literally stuck there, as the Romans broke through their defenses, laying siege with their food and water stores dwindling. Collectively, historically, we are stuck bein hamitzarim, stuck in our fear and our powerlessness. And I know maybe you feel that individually. We have all been at some point bein hamitzarim. I don't think there is a single one of us who hasn't at some point in our lives felt trapped by our circumstance. So this is, our tradition says, our entrance into Tisha B'Av. We are restless. Literally, restless. There is no rest. We are stuck. We are unable to see a different way, or perhaps a way at all. And yet, this Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. The name comes from the text we read, the third Haftarah of Consolation, which is read on tomorrow morning, which begins by describing, it says, Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah. And it's not a pretty vision, spoiler alert. But I'm not the first rabbi, neither classical nor modern, to think that perhaps there's a deeper connection, to think that Shabbat Chazon is not just about Isaiah's dire prophecies, but our own collective and individual ability to envision a different future. Tisha B'Av then becomes a space or a way or a time to see ourselves out of those mitzarim, perhaps not yet to dry land, but neither stuck in the thrashing sea. So I promised an ending, but also a beginning. The Hebrew word for crisis is mashber, but in ancient usage, mashber also meant the birthing stool. Crisis, then, in our tradition, is not merely a collapse. It is a moment of labor, the threshold of something brand new. On Tisha B'Av, we sit in the ashes of catastrophe, sometimes literally, mourning destruction that felt and can still feel total. And yet, Jewish tradition insists that this day of grief, Tisha B'Av itself, is also the very day that the Messiah is born. And so Tisha B'Av becomes more than lament. It actually becomes a radical claim of vision. In our most shattered moments, we are not ending, we are beginning. Outside the mitzarim, through the mitzarim, there is possibility. Redemption may not come in spite of crisis, but actually through it. Or perhaps more poetically, a teaching I have long loved by the Sikh activist Valerie Kaur, who wrote it for a moment in American history but feels so prescient on Tisha B'Av, and maybe especially this Tisha B'Av. She said, in our tears and agony, we hold our children close and confront the truth. The future is dark. It could be straight out of the book of Lamentations, by the way. But she continues, but my faith dares me to ask, what if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if all the mothers who came before us are standing behind us now, whispering in our ear, you are brave? What if this is our great contraction before we birth a new future? Back to the liminal. The most intense and transformative stage of labor is called transition. That moment when everything feels impossible, when the pain is at its peak, and yet the birth is right there. It's the place between what was and what will be. And tonight on Shabbat Chazon, we live in that space. We're no longer fully inside Bein HaMitzarim. We're not completely engulfed by the narrow straits, but we haven't yet reached the comfort of next Shabbat, Shabbat Nachamu. We are Bein Uvein, between and within, standing in a sacred and maybe scary liminal moment. And how heartbreakingly real that feels, especially this year. We carry with us the devastation of war, unbearable loss of life in Israel and in Gaza. We carry the names and faces of our hostages who are still not home. We carry fear, we carry heartbreak, and we carry a deep, desperate longing for peace, for healing, for something different, communally and also sometimes for our own lives and families. But our tradition dares to teach that crisis is not only breaking, it is becoming. That in the very moment everything feels like too much, something new might be ready to emerge. So what do we do with this tonight? We breathe. We ground ourselves in chazon, in vision and the possibility of envisioning. And then, as Valerie Kaur teaches, echoing the wisdom of the midwife, breathe, then push. Shabbat Shalom.